Why does it always end with me feeling worse? Maybe you've said this, or maybe you've just felt it. A conversation that left you drained, a friend who always needs saving, a co-worker who subtly shifts blame, a partner who never seems satisfied. You walk away wondering, was it me? Am I too sensitive? Why do I feel so small right now? If this sounds familiar, this episode is for you, because what you're dealing with may not be just difficult people. It may be energy vampires, people who, without shouting, without violence, still manage to suck the life out of you. And no, this isn't spiritual fluff. This is psychology. And more importantly, this is your freedom. And to reclaim it, we have to understand the game. How they drain you. It always starts small, so small that if you weren't paying attention, you'd miss it entirely. A message. Hey, can I talk? It seems harmless, maybe even sweet. You're the kind of person who shows up for others. That's what you do. So you say yes. 1 hour later, your chest feels heavy. Your head aches. You feel tired, not physically, but emotionally, like someone siphoned something out of you that you can't quite name. And then, just a few days later, it happens again. Same person, same tone, same sense of urgency wrapped in soft words. Another monologue, another crisis, another situation where their emotions are suddenly your responsibility. You listen, you reassure, you problem solve, but you never get to speak. Not really. And even when you do, the conversation circles back to them like a boomerang. At first, you think you're being helpful. You believe this is what good people do, what friends do. You tell yourself they're just going through a lot right now. It'll pass. But time passes, and it doesn't. The weight just grows heavier. Eventually, you begin to flinch when their name pops up on your screen. Not because you don't care, but because you already know how you'll feel after. Depleted, overwhelmed, numb. That's the thing about emotional drainers. They don't always yell or control you in loud, obvious ways. Their power lies in the quiet erosion, a slow drip of emotional dependency dressed up as closeness. They begin as the victim. No one understands me. You're the only one who listens. If I didn't have you, I don't know what I'd do. It sounds like connection. It sounds like trust. But listen carefully. These are not compliments. These are anchors. They're not admiring you. They're securing themselves to you. So if they go down, they take you with them. Then come the small comments. You're too sensitive. You always take things the wrong way. I didn't mean it like that. And suddenly, you're the one second-guessing yourself. You're no longer the helper. You're the overreactor. The one who's too emotional. Too difficult. This is how it happens. You become the emotional sponge, soaking up their stress, absorbing their anxiety, taking it all in while quietly leaking yourself out. You start making excuses for them. They don't mean it. They're just stressed. They had a rough childhood. And you keep showing up, even when you're empty, even when it hurts. Because somewhere along the line, you started confusing being needed with being loved. That's the most dangerous part. You call it loyalty. You call it empathy. You call it love. But what it really is, depletion, dressed up as devotion. A draining relationship wearing the mask of connection. And you don't even realize it until you've lost pieces of yourself. Not all at once, but little by little. Your boundaries, your energy, your peace, your joy. You forget what it feels like to be emotionally full. To be in a conversation that gives as much as it takes. To be with someone who notices when you're not okay and doesn't just keep talking anyway. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. So many of us were taught that our value comes from how much we can endure. That love means carrying others, no matter the cost. That empathy is a bottomless resource, but it's not. You are not a well with infinite depth. You are not a rescue boat for someone who refuses to swim. You are not the solution to someone else's refusal to self-regulate. And yet, without realizing it, you've become their lifeline. Because here's what they know, consciously or not. You'll say yes, even when you mean no. You'll answer, even when you're exhausted. You'll stay, even when they're not changing. Why? Because they've conditioned you to believe that walking away makes you the bad guy. That setting a boundary means you don't care. That pulling back is abandonment. But none of that is true. The truth is this: someone who drains you consistently isn't relying on your love. They're feeding on your availability. And if you don't start protecting that availability, if you don't begin filtering who gets access to your energy, then this cycle will repeat over and over with them, or someone else who finds the same cracks in your emotional armor. In the next part, we'll explore why this dynamic works so well, why certain people seem to instinctively find the givers, and why those of us who care deeply are often the easiest to manipulate unless we learn to see the pattern and stop the leak at its source. What's really happening? So let's take a step back. Why does this dynamic work so well? Why do we keep giving to people who only seem to take? Why do we feel guilt, not relief, when we finally try to set a boundary? It's not just personality. It's not just kindness. It's something deeper, psychological patterned, almost trained. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And in relationships like these, that's exactly what happens. You think it's just who you are. You're just a good listener. You're just an empath. You're just trying to help. But what if those aren't traits but roles? Roles you were unconsciously cast into a long time ago and have been playing ever since. Maybe, growing up, you learned that keeping the peace meant being quiet. That love came through service, not presence. That your feelings had to be small so someone else's could take up space. So you adapted. You became hyper-attuned. You learned to anticipate other people's needs before they even voiced them. You learned that being available, agreeable, responsive, that's what made you worthy. And now, as an adult, you're still playing out that same unconscious script. Only this time, it's not with a parent or caregiver. It's with a partner, a friend, a boss, a sibling. Different actors, same play. That's the thing about unconscious patterns. They don't feel like choices. They feel like truth. And when someone comes along who knows, whether intuitively or manipulatively, how to activate that script, you fall in step without even realizing it. Because they mirror the dynamic you already know. They feed on your instinct to overgive, to over-explain, to over-function. And they subtly punish you when you stop. They withdraw affection. They guilt trip. They flip the script. Suddenly, you're the selfish one. You're the cold one. You're the one who's changed. And because you're wired for harmony, you cave. You go back to over-functioning, to absorbing, to being available. But let's call this what it is. It's not love. It's not empathy. It's emotional enmeshment. A blurred line between you and them, where your feelings, needs, and limits dissolve to make space for theirs. Carl Jung had a word for this too: projection. When someone projects, they unconsciously place their own unprocessed emotions onto someone else. So if they're angry but don't know how to deal with it, suddenly you're the one being too intense. If they're insecure, suddenly you're the one who's judging them. If they feel abandoned, you're the emotionally distant one. And here's the trap. If you don't know where you end and they begin, you'll absorb all of that. You'll think you are the problem. You'll start apologizing for things that aren't yours. You'll make yourself smaller, quieter, softer, so they can feel okay. But no matter how much you give, it's never enough. Because it's not really about you. It's about them and what they're projecting onto you. And still, you stay. Not because you don't know something's wrong, but because something in you still believes you can fix it. That if you just try harder, they'll finally see your worth. That if you're just patient enough, they'll change. But they won't. Not because they can't, but because they don't have to, as long as you keep compensating. That's the unspoken deal. You take responsibility for their emotions, and they never have to face them. You manage their chaos, and they never have to grow. It works for them. It works so well, in fact, that they'll resist any attempt you make to shift the dynamic. They'll say you're being mean. They'll say you're not the same. They'll tell you you need help. Because from their perspective, losing your emotional labor feels like abandonment. It feels like rejection. It feels like betrayal. And to be clear, it's not your job to fix that perception. You are not a therapist. You are not a savior. You are not a substitute for their self-awareness. What you are is someone who's finally waking up to the pattern. And here's where things start to shift. The moment you become conscious of the game is the moment you can stop playing it. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires this exact kind of awakening. It's not about blaming others. It's about recognizing how your own unconscious needs and fears have kept you in roles that don't serve you. Do you need to feel needed to feel loved? Do you confuse conflict with failure? Do you equate boundaries with abandonment? These are questions that don't have easy answers, but asking them is where the healing begins. Because once you start pulling your energy back, once you stop immediately responding, once you pause before absorbing, something strange happens. They panic. They push harder. They provoke. Because silence from you feels like loss of control for them. And that's when you know you're not crazy. You were just caught in a system, an emotional economy, where your empathy was currency. And you were paying everyone's bills but your own. So what now? Do you walk away? Not always. But you do start watching. Who gets angry when you set a boundary? Who tries to make you feel guilty for resting? Who only calls when they're in crisis? These are not just observations. They're instructions, guidelines, signals. Not about them, but about you. About what you need to reclaim. About where your energy is leaking. About how to stop bleeding into dynamics that only leave you hollow. In the next part, we'll explore what that reclamation actually looks like. Not just theoretically, but practically. What it means to step out of the role of the rescuer and into the role of the self-protector. Because awareness is the first step, but action is the transformation. The cost of always being the strong one. Let's talk about the identity you never meant to build, but ended up carrying like armor. You, the strong one, the capable one, the one who doesn't break, who doesn't ask, who doesn't need. Not because you've never wanted to, but because somewhere along the way, you learned that being strong was your only safe option. Maybe it started in childhood. Maybe no one came when you cried. Maybe comfort was conditional. Maybe asking for help led to shame, not support. So you adapted. You became self-reliant, emotionally independent, low maintenance. You stopped asking and started providing. You stopped feeling and started fixing. You learned that strength meant silence. That value meant usefulness. And now, years later, you're the one everyone leans on. The emotional first responder. The human bandage. The steady hand in a crisis. But here's the part they don't see. Your strength is costing you more than anyone realizes. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the persona, the mask we wear to meet the expectations of the world. You've built a persona of strength, and it's worked. So well, in fact, that people believe it. Sometimes even you believe it. But that mask has weight, and the longer you wear it, the harder it is to breathe underneath. Because when you're always the strong one, no one asks how you are. No one checks in. No one offers a shoulder. Because you're the shoulder. You've become so identified with being okay that not being okay feels like failure. So you power through. You smile through the exhaustion. You support others while secretly unraveling. You joke about being tired, but you don't rest. You say I'm fine and no one questions it. But here's what no one tells you about always being strong. Eventually, it stops feeling like strength and starts feeling like isolation. There's a loneliness in being dependable, a silence in being the stable one. Because you don't get to fall apart. You don't get to scream or shut down or opt out. You're not allowed to have limits. Because the minute you show one, people panic. They say, "What's wrong with you?" They say, "You've changed." They say, "You're not being yourself." But you are being yourself, probably for the first time in a long time. And that's the tragedy of the strong one. You've trained the people around you to depend on your silence, to count on your calm, to rely on your emotional labor, not because they're bad, but because you never let them see another version of you. You hid your needs behind capability. You buried your pain beneath responsibility. You wore strength like a badge. And now, you're tired, not just physically, but existentially. This is what Jung warned about. That what you repress doesn't just disappear, it becomes shadow. The denied parts of you don't vanish. They wait, and eventually they show up. In the snappiness you can't explain, in the fatigue that doesn't go away, in the hollow ache you feel even after a full night's sleep. That's not weakness. That's accumulation. Years of unmet needs. Years of performing wellness instead of embodying it. Years of swallowing your pain so others could digest theirs. And here's where it gets dangerous. When you begin to identify with the mask more than the self beneath it. When strength becomes your only language, and silence becomes your default setting. You stop reaching out because no one ever reaches back. You stop crying because no one notices. You stop hoping because hope feels like a luxury you can't afford. But let me ask you this. What if strength isn't what we've been taught? What if real strength isn't about holding it all together, but knowing when to let some of it fall? What if strength is actually found in the soft parts? In asking, in receiving, in being seen? Carl Jung's concept of individuation speaks to this deeply. He believed that becoming whole requires integrating the parts of us we've exiled, not just the light but the shadow, not just the competence but the vulnerability. And that's the work, to reclaim the parts of yourself you abandoned in service of others, to take off the mask not all at once, but piece by piece until you can breathe again. Because the cost of always being strong is too high. It's your joy, your spontaneity, your peace, your presence. But there is a way back. It begins with small rebellions, letting a message go unanswered, saying, "I'm not available right now," choosing rest over response, allowing yourself to not be okay without apology. And when people resist, because they will, remember, that's not a sign you're wrong. It's a sign you've changed. You are not here to carry everyone. You are not here to be the solution. You are not a structure. You are a soul. And that soul deserves care, not just from others, but from you. In the next part, we'll explore what that care looks like. How to build boundaries that don't feel like walls, but feel like doors you finally get to close. Not out of punishment, but out of protection. Because being strong doesn't mean being available. It means knowing your limits and honoring them. Breaking the pattern. Maybe you've noticed it. The way your body tenses when their name pops up on your screen. How your heart sinks before you even open the message. It's not because you dislike them. It's because you already know what they want, what they'll say, and how you'll feel after. Drained. Again. That subtle dread is your intuition trying to get your attention. And if you've been ignoring it, it's not your fault. Because we're not taught to protect our energy. We're taught to be kind, to be generous, to always be there. Especially if you've been the strong one your whole life. The responsible one, the empath, the listener. Then drawing a boundary might feel like betrayal. But let's be clear. There's a difference between connection and consumption. If someone only reaches for you when they're sinking and never offers a hand when you're drowning, that's not a relationship. That's extraction. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And often, instead of doing their own inner work, people project their pain onto you, not because you caused it, but because you were available." So how do we break this pattern? It begins by understanding that emotional labor has value. Your attention, your empathy, your time. These are currencies, and you've been giving them away for free, often to people who never learned how to hold space for themselves. The first step is subtle. Delay your response. Not every message needs an instant reply. Not every problem is yours to fix. Pause. Observe what happens when you don't jump in. The second step? Notice your body. Where do you tense when you talk to them? What part of you feels smaller, tighter, quieter? Your body always tells the truth long before your mind catches up. Third, test the space. Set a boundary. Gently but clearly. Say no once. Watch how they respond. If it creates chaos, the connection was conditional. If they respect it, maybe there's hope. But most importantly, refuse to abandon yourself. Too often, we trade our peace for closeness. We silence our needs to maintain the bond. We become who they want us to be, calm, agreeable, endlessly available, in hopes they'll love us back. But here's the paradox. The more you abandon yourself to be loved, the less love you actually feel. Because true intimacy requires presence, not performance. Jung's idea of individuation teaches us that becoming whole means stepping away from the roles others assign us. You are not their therapist. You are not their parent. You are not their savior. You are yourself. And that's enough. Breaking this pattern won't be easy. It might trigger guilt, pushback, even loneliness. But in that loneliness, something else emerges. Clarity. The sense of returning home to yourself. You'll realize that protecting your energy isn't selfish. It's sacred. In the next part, we'll explore what it means to rebuild, to form relationships based not on need or guilt, but on mutual nourishment and respect. Because once you learn how to stop leaking energy, you begin to discover who's truly meant to be in your life, and who was just there to drain the light from it. Reclaiming your energy. Once you've started setting boundaries, something strange begins to happen. At first, there's resistance, maybe even panic, from them and sometimes from you. You'll feel the urge to explain, to soften your no, to reassure them that you're still kind, still caring, still the same. But here's the thing. You're not, because something inside you has shifted, not in a dramatic, overnight kind of way, but in a deeper, more honest way. You've stopped bleeding energy just to keep peace. You've stopped offering comfort when no one offers it back. And in that stillness, a question surfaces. What if I gave that energy to myself? It sounds simple, maybe even selfish, especially if you've been taught that self-worth is earned through self-sacrifice. But that belief has cost you. It's cost you clarity, creativity, rest, trust in your own needs. Carl Jung believed that psychic energy is finite. It flows like a current, either outward into the world or inward into the self. When it flows outward too much, without return, we lose touch with our center. So reclaiming your energy begins with redirection, not blocking people out of anger, but choosing not to engage from a place of depletion. It starts when you ask, does this give to me or only take from me? And when the answer is clear, you listen. You pause the conversation. You let the call go to voicemail. You take a walk instead of explaining yourself again, not as a punishment, as an act of preservation. And slowly, you begin to feel something you might not have felt in a while. Presence. Suddenly, there's space in your day where anxiety used to live. Moments of silence no longer feel like danger zones. Your mind, once scattered, starts to come home to itself. That's the quiet magic of energetic return. You remember what you enjoy when no one is asking you for anything. You reconnect with parts of you that were buried under obligation. You stop performing and start becoming. And here's where it gets powerful. As your energy returns, your standards rise. You begin to notice the difference between someone who sees you and someone who just uses you. You become less reactive to drama and more responsive to alignment. You don't need to fix people anymore. You don't rush to rescue. You don't need their approval to feel okay. That freedom, it's earned. Through discomfort, yes, but also through deep listening. Listening to the part of you that's been whispering all along, I'm tired. I'm not okay with this. I need something different. And maybe for the first time, you actually hear it. And instead of pushing it down, you protect it. That is the moment you stop leaking energy and start living with it. In the next part, We'll talk about what happens when you rebuild your life. Not around who needs you most, but around who nourishes you best. Because you weren't born to be an emotional sponge. You were meant to be a full, radiant self. And your energy was never meant to be a currency for survival. It was always meant to be sacred. When you change, everything changes. When you start to protect your energy, not everyone will applaud. Some will get confused. Some will get angry. Some will try to pull you back into who you used to be. The person who never said no, who always made time, who took on guilt, like it was your responsibility. And you'll feel it. The tension, the distance, the silence. At first, it might feel like loss, like you're giving something up. But in truth, it's just the shedding of what was never yours to carry. Because when you stop playing your old roles, people lose their scripts. They don't know how to relate to the new version of you, the one with boundaries, with pauses, with peace. And that's okay. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who others expect, not who you trained yourself to be just to survive." When you choose alignment over approval, the world shifts. You'll notice your circle gets smaller, but the space feels larger. Less noise, more depth. Fewer obligations, more intention. You'll realize that some connections were held together by your silence, not shared values. By your availability, not real reciprocity. And when you pull that thread, they unravel. It's not that people are inherently bad. It's that many are unconsciously conditioned to take, to demand, to attach themselves to anyone who won't say enough. When you become the one who says it, you disrupt the pattern. You force others to face themselves. And not everyone is ready for that. Some will call you selfish, distant, arrogant, cold. But none of those labels define you. They define their discomfort. Because you're no longer reacting from wounds, but responding from awareness. And awareness is powerful. It's what allows you to see manipulation without becoming bitter, to feel disappointment without drowning in it, to walk away without burning bridges. Because sometimes the most powerful exit is the quiet one. Not with rage, not with drama, just the steady silence of someone who has reclaimed their center. You are not leaving to punish them. You are leaving to remember you. And in that remembering, something sacred happens. You stop needing others to complete you. You stop chasing approval. Stop negotiating your worth. Stop trying to be palatable to people who only like the edited version of you. You begin to trust that real connection, the kind that nourishes, not drains, only grows when you're fully yourself. So you start showing up that way, unapologetically whole, energetically sovereign, soft when you choose, strong when it matters. And you learn the difference between being alone and being at peace. One is emptiness, the other is expansion. And when that expansion begins, when your life stops revolving around what others need from you, you'll realize something profound. You were never too much. You were just in the wrong place. In the next part, we'll explore what it means to build a life from this new place. A life that protects your energy not as a defense mechanism, but as a declaration of self-respect. Because peace isn't just something you find. It's something you build. And it starts with the decision. I'm no longer available for what empties me. The new stillness. It doesn't happen all at once. This return to yourself. It comes in moments. In the way silence no longer feels like loneliness, but like clarity. In the way you wake up one morning and realize you no longer feel the need to explain yourself. In the way someone tries to press that old button and you notice it, but you don't move. No reaction, no performance, just stillness. Because finally the noise is not yours. And that stillness? It's not emptiness, it's self-respect. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." You are not a sponge for other people's chaos. You are not a mirror for their projections. You are not a home for their storms. You are a boundary, a breath, a becoming. And the moment you stop handing your peace to those who never knew what to do with it, that's when life begins to shift. Not loudly, but fundamentally. You don't need revenge. You don't need closure. You don't even need to be understood. You just need to be whole. And that wholeness, it's what they never expected. It's what they can't control. And it's what sets you free. So take it slowly. Let them misunderstand you. Let them call you distant, changed, too quiet. Because when you're no longer performing for love, you start living from love. And in this stillness, you'll hear yourself again. Not the echo of what they wanted from you, but the voice you silenced to keep the peace. The voice that says, you're no longer available, and you never needed to be.